Okay, so today we're going to talk about arthropods. Arthropods are still invertebrate. We're just looking at another phylum within that invertebrate category, and we're still talking about the kingdom Animalia. So arthropods are characterized by having segmented bodies, jointed appendages, and hard, semi-hard, external skeletons. So they have an exoskeleton. Most arthropods have an open circulatory system, and many of them have wings. Not every species displays the same features, so they are unique in that characteristic. And the features of this phyla as a whole can vary depending on the species of arthropod. So here is a traditional wasp. Almost called it a bee. If you notice, we can see the individual segments. You have your head, your thorax, and your abdominal cavities. With the head, we notice that we have our compound eye located on there. We will also see antennae coming off of the head. With the thorax or mid-body region, you will have usually legs coming off, two sets typically, but you can have one. And if there's wings, the winged appendages are typically on the thorax. And then we have the abdominal region. The abdominal region will also have legs possibly on there depending upon the type of arthropod that we have, and it will have, in this case, a stinger or weapon for mechanism. Some arthropods have what we call a cephalothorax. This is where these two regions right here are fused together and we look as one. So you can't tell the difference between the thorax region here and the abdominal region, such as in a cockroach. That would have a cephalothorax, where it looks like it's fused to there. As you can see, our beautiful butterfly here, they have jointed appendages, and we can see that they do have in the legs some bends that go with that so that they're able to move and attach themselves to things. Unlike a parapoda or parabete and a setae and annelids, arthropods' appendages are able to move and bend and joint, giving them a little bit more complexity. They will also have a jointed foot, and we can see our little foot down here. The variety of jointed appendages such as walking legs, sensory antennas, and several mouth parts. So we do have antennas, and if you've ever noticed, antennae can move on the top of their head, and then this is kind of like a large tongue that sticks out, and if you can see this yellow material that's in here, it's actually collecting a nectar, so it can consume that. This is a dung beetle that we have here, and if you notice on the dung beetle, it has a hard exoskeleton. This exoskeleton is rigid, it is complex, it's made of a carbohydrate that is typically found in plants, but also is made by invertebrates called chitin. This is secreted. The exoskeleton provides the support against predators, and it helps to stop water loss. This exoskeleton cannot grow. It actually has to be shed. And so they have to periodically molt or lose that exoskeleton and grow back into another skeleton, kind of like a snake. It does have jointed appendages on here. And then crustaceans have a very, very thick exoskeleton that is hard, where spiders have a thinner one. Beetles have a hard one as well. And so depending on the type, depends on the thickness of its exoskeleton, but none of them have an endoskeleton, and none of them have a hydroskeleton, such as in our Cnidarian, who have hydroskeletons. They all have an exoskeleton, and again, they do have to periodically molt that exoskeleton to grow a new one. So for the respiratory and circulatory system, many land arthropods will breathe through a network of fine tubes. They have a trachea where air enters the opening of the body called the speculums. It will pass in the trachea, and then it delivers oxygen to the body. Land arthropods breathe through what we call book lungs, where we have gills in our aquatic arthropods. So there is a difference between lungs and gills at this point. The circulatory system in arthropods is open, which means blood will drain back to the heart. It does not contain a vessel system, such as our arteries, capillaries, and veins. Most arthropods have internal organs that are bathed within this blood, so the blood will cover over top of them, they'll absorb nutrients, and then it will drain back to the heart, and the heart will then recirculate that blood throughout the entirety of the body. Because of this insufficient way with an open circulatory system, this limits the size that arthropods can grow because they're not able to get nutrients to all portions of their body if they grow too large. So when we talk about feeding, they have a variety of mouth parts depending on the food that they are trying to eat. The intestinal tract for arthropods will extend from the mouth all the way down to the anus and contains specialized structures that will store and both mechanically and chemically digest food and then eliminate waste products. And so they are a little bit more specialized than our cephalopods and our other organisms before this. Arthropods do have an excretory system. The Malpighiani tubes, these are narrow extensions that are on the lower intestinal tract. They will be bathed in blood. The blood will come back, and so it will actually dissolve particles, and they can move through those tubes into the gut. Metabolic waste will remain in the gut and eventually will be removed from the body through the anus. Arthropods have a compound eye. The compound eye is made up of, instead of one individual eye, thousands of individual visual units. And so we can see a picture of a compound eye here. Each one of those visual units will gather sensory information in a very small view. And then it sends that information back to the brain, where the brain can then take all the components, put it together, and it can form a distinct image. Part of this is so that it can have the image may not be very clear because there is so much information coming. It is exceptionally good at detecting movement, though, so it's hard to sneak up on an arthropod. The detection of movement is a survival technique for arthropoda. Most arthropods are able to reproduce sexually only, but some can produce offspring from an unfertilized egg. This is known as parthenogenesis. The fertilization of an egg is done by the sperm, which is usually an internal portion. The sperm is deposited within the female. The female then will be able to develop or lay her eggs. A lot of the arthropods are only able to have one birthing of offspring, where some are able to have multiple birthings of offspring. They will have not just one baby, though, like they can only go through one reproductive stage. So they'll have hundreds of babies at one time, but they only do it once. And part of that's because it is extremely intensive to have a baby, so you use a lot of energy to do this, and they don't take care of their young. They're not very good parents, we'll just put it that way. They believe in the process. Let's have a whole bunch and hope somebody makes it. Arthropods will discard their exoskeleton as they go through their stages of life, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that is one thing that's important, that they do molt. Traditionally, they're divided up into two groups, those that have jaws, those that have fangs and piercers. So when we have four main groups of arthropods, we have subphylums of hexapod, myriapod, crustacea, and our Scyphioids. So when we start talking about the success of arthropods, the total number of arthropod species exceeds the number of all other species combined. There are more than 5 million species of arthropods that exist. And if we think about this, there's more bugs on this earth than there are anything else. Anything. And that's all arthropods. They are very specialized for the food that they're going to eat, and they're extremely important to the environment.